Hello world. So earlier this year I compared the Sony A6400 to my old cell phone, the LG G6, as a travel camera, and I did prefer the A6400 because of its superior image quality while being relatively compact. But since then I picked up two 4K pocket cameras. One being the DJI Osmo Pocket and the other being the DJI Osmo Action. So I took all of these to my recent trip to Thailand and Korea. So which one did I prefer? Is it still the A6400, or are one of these mini cams better than the A6400 as a travel camera? Let's go find out. Okay, so the first, the DJI Osmo Pocket. This gimbalized 4K mini camera does fit in your pocket. It's that small, and because it's gimbalized, it's quite stable, and the image quality just keeps surprising me how good it is. Even in low light, it's not too bad actually. And it shoots 4K up to 60 frames per second and 1080p up to 120 frames per second. Okay, so the main advantage of the Osmo Pocket is that it's gimbalized. So it's stabilized by a gimbal. So it's definitely more stable than the A6400, which doesn't have any in-body stabilization, so you have to rely on the lens stabilization. And the A6400, it's quite shaky when you're walking and talking at the same time, whereas the vlog footage from these are quite stable. And the other thing is that it is a mechanical stabilization compared to the electronic stabilization that the Osmo Action has. So even in low lighting, the stabilized footage will be quite stabilized compared to the electronic stabilization, which isn't as good in low light. And secondly, the image quality out of this thing is amazing, especially considering that this sensor size is the same as your smartphone. And also because it has a gimbal, you can do all these motion lapses where it's motion time lapse, and I use that quite often, especially during the latter part of my trip. And it really is that small. You can put a gimbal protector on this thing and then just put it in your pocket and just carry it around everywhere without needing any kind of camera bag or any kind of backpacks. And that's a huge advantage because there are some areas where you can't carry a backpack or like your full camera gear, and you can just carry this little thing and no one really cares. Especially if you hold it like this, it really covers majority of the camera, and the only part that sticks out is that little lens portion. So you can really be discreet when you're vlogging. Okay, and some negatives about this DJI Osmo Pocket. First is its relatively narrow angle. The DJI Osmo Action, being an action cam, has a really wide angle, and the Sony being an interchangeable lens camera, you can put in wide angle lens to get that wide shot. But this thing, it's stuck at 28mm equivalent field of view, and it's not a problem most of the time, but there are some instances where you feel I wish it was a little bit wider. And the second weakness is that it is a gimbal, so it's got lots of moving parts, so it's not the sturdiest, especially compared to something like the Osmo Action, which you can throw anything at and it will survive. And also it doesn't have a removable battery, it's just a built-in battery, and if it runs out, I mean, you can charge it while it's recording, but that's another set of wires that's attached to it, so it's unfortunate. But the battery life, it's not too bad. Unless you're filming constantly for the whole day, this will last the day, so I guess it's not really a negative. And the last negative about this thing is that it needs a lot of accessories. It's almost like an Apple product. So this little thing here, the controller wheel that controls the gimbal, is about $60 US. And also I bought a microphone adapter, which is also about $40, and that's already $100. And up next is the DJI Osmo Action. the tough action camera with super electronic stabilization. And since it came out, it has been that true competitor to the king of action cams, the GoPro, that we've all been waiting for. It can shoot up to 4K at 60 frames per second and 240 frames per second for 1080p. And some strengths to this little camera, starting with that it's waterproof right out of the box, and it can go into water and be out in the rain. And that's the main reason that I bought this camera, because Thailand, when I went, it was the rainy season, and also visiting Thailand, we're gonna go to a lot of beaches and also the pools. And it did just that, and I was really happy with everything that this filmed underwater and around the water. And the second strength to this camera is that it's quite durable. Every time I drop my Osmo Pocket, unfortunately, which happens more often than it should, I'm like, no! But when this drops, I'm just like, it'll live. So it's something that is important when you're prone to dropping your camera like I do. And the third reason is this nice little front screen here. I'm gonna switch over there. Yeah, this little front screen. And this front screen, you might think it's not necessary with an action cam that has super wide angle, but still it's nice to have when you have a lot of people, or when you're in a tight space and you want to know that you're in the shot. So it's definitely good to have. And I think the Osmo Action is the only action camera that has a front screen, except for the GoPro Hero Max that just came out. And now on to some negatives about this great little mini camera. And the first one is quite subjective, mainly because I'm not a professional and this observation isn't the most technical, but I found the Osmo Pocket's videos to be sharper and the Osmo Actions to be grainy compared to the Osmo Pocket. I don't know why, maybe my setup is wrong. I try to play with the minimum ISOs and everything, but still I find it to be more grainy than the Osmo Pocket. And the second negative is the famous screen lag. So whenever you're filming in 4K with this camera, you're gonna have lag. You're gonna have lag on the screen. So this object might just pass by and then you see it pass by on the screen a second later. And I mean, you get used to it, but still it's not the nicest thing to have on an action cam where you need to capture everything as soon as you can. But yeah, you do get used to it, and it's not something that bothered me a lot, but I know that it bothers some people a lot, so it is definitely a negative. I mean, with the latest firmware, they did fix it, or they improved it with the 1080p footage, but for 4K I feel like it's still quite laggy. And lastly, the best budget 4K mirrorless camera of 2019, at least in my opinion, the A6400. But with its APS-C sensor and a bright lens like the Sigma f1.4 lenses, it's capable in shooting in any lighting situations, as long as it's on a tripod. And it shoots 4K up to 30 frames per second and 1080p up to 120 frames per second. And it really is that complete package if you want to just shoot videos or use it as your YouTube camera. And the biggest strength of the A6400 is its image quality. With its nice bokeh or background blur, its image is definitely more pleasing than the image from the Osmo Pocket and the Osmo Action, where the two kind of look like they're similar to your cell phone videos, whereas the footage from A6400 definitely looks like it's filmed with a mirrorless camera that's meant for filming, obviously. And the second advantage of the camera is the low light capabilities. with big sensor comes good low light capability. So with its bigger sensor, it lets more light in, and especially with brighter lenses or wider lenses, it definitely is less grainy compared to the other two. And the last advantage to the camera is its ability to have different lenses, so its zoom capabilities. Unlike the other two, which is limited to a fixed focal length, it's an interchangeable camera, so you can put in other lenses to get a different focal length depending on what you need, which is a huge advantage while traveling because you can't always walk up to a animal or something like that to get a closer shot, whereas the zoom lens will get you that close image. I mean, you can crop in, but it ruins the image quality. Now on to some negatives about the A6400 compared to the other two, and the biggest thing is its size. A6400, it's a small camera. It's not big by any means, especially with this small kit lens. But with the bigger lenses like the Sigma 16mm f1.4, it becomes a bigger camera, and it's significantly bigger than the Osmo Pocket or the Action. And carrying that around all day, especially while you're traveling and walking a lot, it's extra weight and another thing that you have to worry about all the time. And it's especially an issue at nighttime because that's when you want to use that bright Sigma lens, but it makes the camera much bigger, so you do end up having to carry a bag or like a camera bag. And the second disadvantage to the A6400 is its stabilization. Since the A64 doesn't have any in-body stabilization, you do have to rely on the lens stabilization. And even with the lens stabilization, it's just not as good as the two Osmos. So you're pretty much limited to using the camera on a tripod in a stationary situation, unless you're putting it on a gimbal. But if you do that, then the size of your kit is a very heavy and large kit that I don't think you'd want to carry around while you're traveling. And also, don't forget about your phone. Even on a trip, there will be instances where you can't bring your camera into an event or to a location because they don't allow it. And if that's the case, just record with your phone. And especially if you don't want to or can't spend the money on a camera like these guys, then just use your phone. And nowadays the phones have good stabilization too, and if they don't, you can always buy a $100 gimbal, phone gimbal, and maybe like a $20 microphone, and you're good to go. Don't have to spend the money if you don't have to, right? Saving is caring. So which one did I use the most? The Osmo Pocket. I felt that this camera was the best balance of being compact and having high image quality. And I also liked, personally, the motion lapse feature quite a bit. And it was nice, just you set it down right beside you and just let it run for 10-20 minutes while you rest up from your day of walking. And I did use my Osmo Action whenever there was water involved, so going to the beach or going to the pool or anywhere that I might get wet in. But other than that, I found myself reaching for the Osmo Pocket most of the time, just because I like the image quality coming out of this thing better. But that's not to say this has bad 4K image quality. It definitely is good. So I would recommend it as your main camera if you're actually going to a beach town or doing a lot of water activities. And the A6400 was mainly used as my indoor and hotel room camera. And other than that, it stayed mostly in my hotel room safe during this trip. And that's because I wanted to travel as lightly as possible since we do a lot of walking during our trips. But I would still bring it to my future trips just because with that f1.4 Sigma lens, it's miles better than the Osmos in terms of low light video quality. In the end though, my travel day pack consisted of the Osmo Pocket and an external battery and a small tripod to set this down while I do my motion lapses. it just feels so much better to not carry a large camera bag full of gear and just bring this and a small side bag or like a backpack. It can capture every moment of your vacation, maybe except for the water activities. So what do you think is the best travel camera? Let me know down below, and until next time,